Hey everyone, this is Josh for the Solopreneur Grind podcast, episode number 64. I'm here with Stephane from Lux Relo. Stephane, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Hi, Josh. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be part of the podcast. I've been listening to quite a number of the past ones, and happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, you'll be featured shortly, so I'm excited for both of us to be able to listen to that. I'm sure we'll have a pretty cool discussion coming up. Can you tell us, Stephane, a little bit about who you are and what you do these days?
Okay, I'll give you a short overview of my background. I'm French originally. Both my parents are French, but I have quite an international background. I was born in London, my brother in Djibouti, my sister in Thailand, and my father was born in Hanoi and my mother in Madagascar.
Oh, wow. That's a spread, if I've ever heard one.
Yes. And my father was a banker and he traveled quite a lot. So I spent also part of my childhood in Switzerland, in France, and in the UK.
Oh, wow. And so, Stephane, I mean, I'll use the low-hanging fruit segue because I know a little bit more about you than our listeners do. Do you think all of that played a big part into what you're doing now? And for those who don't know, could you explain kind of what you're doing now and what you're focused on?
Yeah, I think it's a big part of who I am, and even if I didn't live far away abroad in Asia or the US, like my cousins are doing now, I think it's in my blood, the international environment, and I think I ended up in the job I'm doing now by luck or by chance or whatever, but I think it was a perfect match.
Got it. So what exactly is it that you're doing right now?
So I have my own relocation and immigration firm since four years. So I'm quite a young entrepreneur in terms of the time the company was set up. But I've been working in the moving and relocation industry for the past 27 years now.
Oh, wow. And can you tell us about how it started, kind of how that, I guess, profession or how you initially got introduced to that industry, how it
Yeah,
began?
Yeah, it began, I did my studies in London, and then as I was French, I had to do my military service at that time. It doesn't exist anymore. And I thought that if I had to do my military service, I wanted it to be, interesting, useful. So I decided to join the Alpine Corps. And within the Alpine Corps, I decided that I wanted to go for the what they call the intelligence section. So it's the guys that are in front that are checking on the enemy in the mountains. And I was lucky enough to do the security during the Olympic Games in Albertville in France, the Winter Olympic Games. And I spent 2 months in French Guiana, securing, places around Guyana, like, the Kourou, where they have the space, how do you call that? The launching spacecraft.
Okay, very cool.
And when I finished my military service, I decided to join my girlfriend at that time, who was living in Paris. And I started to look for a job. Difficult time, took me 6 months, couldn't find anything. And then one day I saw an ad, they were looking for a sales guy and maybe a future, branch manager of one of their branch they had. And when I went for the interview, I didn't know it was a moving company. And when they presented the whole thing, I said, wow, it seems great. And anyway, I don't have a job, so let's start with that and we'll see how it goes. And and it's how I started. And after 6 months of being a salesman, junior salesman, the CEO of the company came to me and said, "Oh, the guy in Lyon he's moving to Africa, and do you want a job?" And I said, "Well, I don't have any experience as a manager. I'm just, a junior sales guy." And he told me, "No, I don't want. I don't care if you don't have the experience. Do you want a job?" And I said, "Okay, let's go for it."
Mm-hmm.
So I did 6 months training, replacing branch managers in different places. And I started as a young, I was 25 at the time, a young branch manager without any experience.
Hmm. What do you think it was that led him to ask you? Were you, exceeding numbers in terms of sales and stuff like that?
I don't really think I was exceeding numbers because, I was just starting, just 6 months in the job. But I was, open-minded, working in an international environment, and always willing to go the extra mile. So maybe it's that, or maybe he didn't have anybody else
Right,
to offer the job to. I don't know.
right. Okay, so then what happens? What was the change like in terms of those two roles? Like how was that transition?
It was huge. It was huge, and it was very difficult for the first year and the first months where I didn't sleep a lot. I was the youngest guy in the team, the less experienced, and it was I had to learn, and at the same time to manage a team, and this was the difficult part because I had to prove everything to those guys that knew much more and much better than me in terms of the industry and everything. But I worked hard. I worked long hours. I unloaded the trucks and the container with them, and just to learn the job. And then I managed to gain their trust, and to be able to do the job how I wanted to do it.
Right. Can I clarify, Stefan? You said moving company, so do you mean like physical
Yeah,
movers? Okay.
physical removal company. Yeah,
Oh
it
wow.
was the first company I worked with, and I want to help them. Because I thought I needed to know the job. I needed to understand and to be able, when discussing with them, to be sure that um, uh, what we were doing and what they were doing was the proper way to do it.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay, so then you get that job and you're I guess having to kind of start all over again in the sense that it was a new role, right? You have to do new things, management, all that stuff. And so what happened there with that role?
Well, at that time we didn't have internet, and I remember when I arrived, we were still using faxes at that time, and cell phones were not existing. For example, we had a big region to cover, and the sales guy, if they didn't call me from the customer's place, for example, I wouldn't be able to reach them for the whole day because we didn't have any cell phone. So that's a big change from what we can do now. So I read a lot of books. I spent a lot of time calling my peers and colleagues within the company, to learn from them, to ask their advice, and to ask how things were supposed to be done. And we also had quite a number of training organized by the company on a regular basis, which is where I learned all the skills, and then I tried to apply my own managerial skills. And well, I think I was at that time quite successful. I stayed there 5 years, and after 5 years, I thought that I wanted to do something else. So I asked if they had any other job in the company. I wanted to move abroad, but it didn't happen, and it's where I started to look for something else.
Got it. Before we move on to where you moved next, any books that you remember from that time that were, that it will, can you remember which ones and
No,
like,
not really. I
no?
don't remember at all what I was reading at that time. And I was reading a few books, but not having a lot of time. I remember working, until 10, 11 at night, at least the first year, which was quite tiring. But it was the only way to catch up with the things I didn't know.
Right. Very cool. Okay, so you decide you're kind of ready for the next step. How did you go about searching for it, and then obviously what came next?
Well, I thought that maybe it was time to do something else. And so I started to search for a new job, and thought about logistic, about transport, about totally other things, and had a few interviews. But at the same time, I contacted my ex-sales manager, who was at that time working for another company. And again, had interviews, and at the end, this guy said, "Oh, we are opening a branch in Strasbourg. Do you want to do it?" So okay, um, I thought about it and said, "Well, the challenge is quite interesting." And anyway, all the offers I received from other industry are not so interesting in terms of challenges and salary. So I decided to move with my family to Strasbourg, and to set up a branch over there. So it was kind of moving backward a bit, because I was alone, didn't have any team, and had to do everything. So I was not doing the packer. I had a subcontractor, but I was doing sales. I was, managing the warehouse. I was doing the accounting, but at a very small level, which was in a way, when I think about it, was kind of being an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was starting from scratch, even if I knew the industry. But if I was working for a big group, it was by the way, you might know it. It's Allied International.
Oh yeah,
They
yeah,
are
yeah.
big in the US. So and so I did that, and stayed there for 1 year and a half, more or less.
Yeah, it sounds like a great training ground for you know any type of business going from there. I'm interested to Stefan, what was it that led you to what you're doing now? So becoming a kind of immigration and relocation specialist. Obviously, there's a little bit of connection between moving, but it's less physical and obviously
Yeah,
more
yeah,
on paper.
just to move forward. So after 1 year and a half, I wanted to again do something else, because the challenge wasn't really there anymore. And so I was supposed to go to Paris for an interview, and with the MD for France. And when I arrived, the guy was with two person from the British office, and they said, "Oh, the guy in Luxembourg resigned. Do you want a job?" And it's how I ended up in Luxembourg, working 2 years for Allied as a branch manager over there. And then I was approached by an independent investor who had a small moving company in Luxembourg. And he said, "Okay, I have big problems. Do you want to run it and turn it around and move it?" It was a pure local and a bit European company. And the guy wanted it to move toward the international business. So I accepted, and I worked 14 years for that company, but that company was acquired twice. Once by international group called Interdin that became Santa Fe. And it's when I started to do relocation, because before we were only doing removals.
Mm-hmm.
But when Interdin acquired the company, we started to do relocation services. So we did more and more. I learned the business, learned the immigration as well. And after 14 years, there was a new CEO. He decided that, he wanted to make some changes, got rid of a few country managers, and it's where I changed life
Right.
4 years ago.
So did he cut people and you were part of that, or
Yeah.
he made changes? Okay.
No, he
So
cut people. Yeah, he
right.
decided that country managers were too expensive and not very efficient. So in quite a number of countries, he decided to ask us to leave. And I think I think it's the best thing that happened to me. I Well, the last 2 years within the company were not as great as it used to be. I was not happy. My wife was always telling me, "Why don't you change? Do something else. Have a purpose in your working life," which I didn't have. And but I was staying for the wrong reasons. Security of a job, salary, kids. Starting university, things like that, which most of the people use as an excuse to stay in their job, which I can understand because I went through that.
Right. Did
But
you have an itch for entrepreneurship before all of that happened? Or was this
no,
yeah, I'm interested to know, like, what was the first month or two like after you got laid off? Was it, oh, I'm going to start my own business, or was
no,
it
not at all, not at
no?
all. So the first thing I did the same day is that I called a transition coach and I said, okay, I've been telling for many years that I only know how to run a moving and relocation a company, and I don't know how to do anything else. Which I was running a company, so basically I could do something else, but
Hmm.
in my mind it was very difficult. So I work with a transition coach, which I think it's very useful, and I suggest to people that have difficulties in their career, or if they are ending up doing the same mistake all the time, having somebody from the outside, not somebody that not somebody that is part of your family, but somebody who will push you out of your comfort zone, someone who will ask tough questions on you. And it's what I did. It was very tough for me, and I think I think I did it about 4 or 5 months, maybe once or twice a week, I don't remember.
Hmm.
And I really didn't know what I wanted to do, so did my CV, sent a few CVs to job postings and so on. Didn't get any luck. At that time I was 49, which it's start to be old for some people. And I think two things made me decide to set up my own company. First one was when I left my previous company, one of our customer told us, "Well, why don't you set up your own company and we'll work with you?" And I was more, no way. I mean, why? And then 4 months after, I met with someone who said, "Why don't you set up your own company? You could do great things, and maybe I can invest and have great ideas." And we talked for 1 hour. And after that, I said, "Well, two things: I don't want to work with this guy, and I'm going to set up my own company." And it's how it started. And before that, I thought that to be an entrepreneur wasn't for me. It was too risky. I didn't have the mindset for that. But suddenly it was like clear in front of me that I needed to be an entrepreneur. And the thing about it is that I decided to do it with my wife, because she was
Oh wow.
already working in the relocation business as a freelance consultant, and she had much more experience than me on the operational part. So it's suddenly the whole family started to support us to set up the company and be entrepreneurs.
Very cool. I don't often hear of a transition that goes that way. I would say actually most is kind of people have, you know, an idea or they are itching to go out on your own. And so I think yours is a little unique in the sense that it definitely wasn't your first thought, but it's definitely a clear sign when you have other people saying you should start your own company. I will be your client. That's obviously a good sign. So how was that a difficult decision? Was that a long decision? Kind of you said then it became clear that it made sense, but was that
I,
over a few weeks? Was that a few months? And then I'd love to hear how it, you know, once you guys decided to pull the trigger, what that looked like.
I think the whole process started before when I worked with my transition coach. I asked
Mm-hmm.
myself the proper questions. What I don't want to see in my new job, what I really liked in my previous job and that I absolutely want in my new job, you know, all those questions and that I put on paper, that I wrote down. I don't want to find this type of things in my next job. And so I think it was so I was laid off in January, and I think it's May, beginning of June, that I
Oh
decided
wow.
to that we decided that we were going to set up our own company. And it was kind of crystal clear. And from that moment, we just worked on setting up the company and be ready to launch it for September. So the whole summer we worked on, you know, the name, the logo, registering the company, which is a bit more difficult in Europe than in the US. Well, what was interesting is that it was also a family work. So, you know, brainstorming with the kids on
Mm-hmm.
the logo, on the name and things like that. But I think, yeah, from that moment when I came back home and told my wife we need to set up our own company, it was pretty clear that it's what we were going to do.
Got it. And then so what do you recommend people do in terms of planning? Because I think a really important aspect of starting your own business is determining what you need to kind of do before you launch, right? And you said it sounds like you spent about a summer getting everything ready, branding, website, et cetera, et cetera. How important do you think that was? And then I'd love to hear about like the first few months after September, how that went.
So the planning is important, but also, I mean, for me, in my case, when you start being an entrepreneur, very often it's difficult because you launch a new product, you've never run a company before, and you go in a market or a city or a country where you've never worked before. In our case, we started in Luxembourg. I worked, you know, 20 years in Luxembourg. I knew the market, I knew the product. And I was running a company. What I didn't know is to be an entrepreneur. And but it was, for me, it was, I wouldn't say easy, but as I was running a company before, all the legal and technical aspect, I knew them. So it was quite easy to put them in place.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to plan, you need to, you know, to set up to-do list and, you know, follow to-do list by type of work to do, legal, you know, website and so on. And important thing also is to do, for me, it was all cheap or free.
Mm-hmm.
So everything I did was, my only thought were on that. If I can have it for free, I'll take for free. If it's, and then otherwise it needs to be the cheapest as possible to start with.
Right. Has your mind's set changed on that regard since?
No, I don't.
No.
I, again, what we can do nowadays with the tools we have on you know, the apps, the internet, you could, you couldn't do it 20 years ago because you didn't have the tools.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, even to register a company, most of the information is online. Most of the process is online. The website, I designed it myself because it's something I like. But of course, if you're not an IT minded, then you need to, subcontract that part to someone that is a specialist in that field. But yeah, for us, most of it we did ourselves. The only thing we didn't do is the logo design. You have web platforms where, people bet and, provide projects, and you just choose the best one.
Mm-hmm.
But then, how the mindset changed. What was a bit of a shock, even if I knew it, is that as I had been on the market for many years, and that I knew the customers, the suppliers, I thought that it would be quite easy to get customer start to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's like starting from scratch again. The only advantage is that you know the product, you know the customers, you know how to sell it, but you have to start from scratch. Most customers don't want to work with you because you don't have any track records in terms of your company and the services you can offer. Even if some of the HR knew me, that's then their colleagues were more not so sure about should we work with a small company that is starting.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the toughest part at the beginning.
So how would you describe that first year then? Was it a relatively smooth transition? Was it very slow for the first few months? Or, I guess at what point did things kind of pick up and you felt a little bit more comfortable, felt some traction?
Really 1 year. And I don't know if it's something you heard when interviewing people, but from what I heard on my side, very often people say, yeah, it's 1 year. 1 year by, you need to convince the people that your company is here to stay, that you are able to provide the services you are selling. So it took 1 year. And but most important, it also showed me that I needed to be more in front in terms of personal branding, which I didn't really do in the past working for a big corporation. And it's how I started to learn that I needed to be representing the company, to be the image of the company, going to networking events, be very active on social media. This I started right away. When I launched the site, right away at the same time, I had a Twitter page, a Facebook page, LinkedIn page, and I was sharing articles and so on, which of course I still do, but I really wanted to be sure that when people would search for a relocation company in Luxembourg, very quickly I would be on the first page and not on page, I don't remember, 46 or 40.
Mm-hmm. And where did you learn that from having previously managed the other moving companies, or were you relying on information online?
Well, all the managerial part, all the accounting part, that was fine because I learned it from my previous company. But really, all the rest, personal branding and social medias and so on, I learned it looking on the internet and talking to people.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Any resources that you recommend for those who are maybe newer or getting started, or even just thinking about entrepreneurship? Like any specific blogs or resources specifically that you were checking or still checking?
Not something particular, but yeah, I was reading articles and checking specific blogs from people. But I think you need to be a bit open-minded when you look at information, but also be careful not to spend too much time surfing the internet, because otherwise you lose time and it doesn't bring any benefit to your company.
Yeah, it's a real fine line between like research and preparation and execution, right?
Yeah.
That balancing act, I think, is super important as an entrepreneur. Stephane, so how would you say the last couple of years have been compared? You know, how has that evolution looked, and what's kind of the main focus for right now, especially given the circumstances? I'd be interested to hear.
Well, we were happy to have a growth every year since we founded the company. And well, our main focus is customer service, and it's also, I mean, we use a lot the word partnership. So partnership with the corporate accounts, partnership with the assignee, partnership with the freelancers. You know, we want everybody to be part of a big team. And it's not, you know, someone working against the other one, or, you know, I will squeeze the prices on the freelancer so that I have more margin. No, it doesn't work like that. And now I'm able to do that, and I'm able to you know, work the way I want, and to go the extra mile if the customer needs, you know, an extra service, which it's sometimes difficult to do in a big corporation. And
Mm-hmm.
being flexible and listening to the customers, it's, I think, what makes the big difference.
Absolutely. What do you think are the two or three biggest lessons you've learned growing your company over the last 3-4 years?
It's hard work. I'm happy to do it now with grown-up children. I only have my daughter at home for them now, because it's hard work, and especially working with my wife, there's a difficult limit between personal and professional life, which
Mm-hmm.
we don't really mind, because, you know, we can arrange our time as we want. And if, for example, I don't want to work a certain day, I can do it. But that's a bit of a challenge if you have young children, because you need to, you know, for example, my wife is more on the operational part, but for me, I'm the sales guy and the networking guy. So some weeks I can spend, you know, 3 or 4 evenings just going to networking events, which is tiring, and you need to be, you know, professional, you need to be lively, you need to do your personal branding, but it can be tough, and sometimes you have months that are not as good as the others, and it can be a bit depressing. And yeah, I think if you have the possibility when you set up a company, if you can do it with someone, that's much easier, because you're never down at the same time, and so you can have, you know, the support of your business partner.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, like we did last year, we took a business coach, a kind of mentor, which I think is very important at a certain stage in the life of the company, because otherwise, as the company grows, you spend more and more time in the day-to-day work, and you don't focus on the broader picture.
Mm-hmm.
And by hiring this guy, where, you know, we have regular meetings and Skype calls, he just take us backwards so that we look at the broader picture. He's you know, giving fresh ideas from outside the industry. As he's working with different industries, he can, you know, look at best practices in other places, and ask us if we can, you know, if we can try it on our business as well. So that's something that I really like, because yeah, it brings us a lot of added value to our business.
Got it. Yeah, I totally agree. I had one of my own in my second year, and especially because I was working primarily alone, it's so helpful to have that fresh perspective. Stephane, just last question or two. What's it like in Luxembourg? And can you give us like a super high level primer on what it would be like to visit?
So Luxembourg is very small. You only have 600,000
Oh, wow.
inhabitants. What is particular about Luxembourg is that it's surrounded by Belgium, Germany, and France, and every day you have 200,000 cross-border workers that are crossing the
Wow.
border, which is a bit of a challenge in terms of traffic,
Hmm.
and which has been a bit of a challenge since the borders are more or less closed with the coronavirus issue. What is great about Luxembourg is that it's very international. You walk in the street, you hear people speaking, German, English, Spanish. You go to the town hall, the person in front of you will speak 4 or 5 languages.
Hmm.
And what is funny is that when you ask the people that you meet for the first time, oh, how long have you been in Luxembourg? And a lot of people say, oh, I came for a 2-3 years assignment, which was my case. And you end up being there 20 years.
Hmm.
It's
Why do you think that is?
because it's easy to do business. The government is pro-business. Uh, People are open-minded. There is so many different cultures that people are able to live and work together, which is great when you see what's happening in a lot of countries actually. But
Hmm.
in Luxembourg, the prime minister will do some of his speech in English just for the international community. You go on official website. It's you have an English version for the locals, which you really means something, because you go in France or Germany, I'm not sure that it would be translated in English. So that's what is particular in Luxembourg.
Very cool. One day, Stefan. One day I'll see you there. Um,
With pleasure.
awesome. Yeah. No. So, Stefan, last question is: do you have like one or two comments you would leave with people who are thinking about getting started on their own? Right? Maybe they're in a 9 to 5 that they're not enjoying, or they're going through tough times now, especially because of COVID and
Yeah.
the given circumstances. What's one or two pieces of advice you would want to leave the listeners with?
Get out of your comfort zone. That's the first. And it's not easy. I went through that, and I didn't want to do it. But if you are not able to do it by yourself, ask a transition coach or someone to kick your ass out.
Hmm.
I would also really encourage people to develop their personal branding through LinkedIn, through uh, going to networking event, doing podcasts like you're doing, and try to work with like-minded people. It's much easier, and also focus on what you're good at. When I was saying, I developed my own website. If you're not good at it, just let somebody else that is much better than you do it. Or if you're
Hmm.
good at sales but not doing great at accounting, then hire the best accountant and let him do the figures, and make sure that you don't lose any money on your taxes. And also read a lot, which I wasn't really doing in the past. So I read more and more business books
Hmm.
to have information from people that can give great advice on the path of an entrepreneur.
Awesome. I asked for one or two. You gave us 5 or 6 there. So we got some bonuses for the listeners. Stefan, really appreciate you coming on, sharing your story. The insights are super valuable. If people do want to hear more about your company or yourself, where do you recommend that they take a look?
The easiest is go on LinkedIn. They will have all my details, company details as well, and I'm quite active on LinkedIn, posting on a regular basis. So please feel free to connect if you need any information or advice.
Awesome. And I can vouch for it because that's actually how we met, right? Was through a LinkedIn group. So highly recommend you reach out. We will have a link to Stefan's profile and probably the website too in the description, no matter where you're listening this to. Stefan, thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. It was really an interesting interview. Like I told you, I think when you asked me, it was a new exercise for me. So getting out of my comfort zone.
That's it. You practice what you preach. That's great to hear. All right, Stephane, really
Thanks.
appreciate it.